everyone. A very warm welcome to wherever you're joining us from the world. Antonio, we have here from Croatia, Carin from Boston. So we are a very international group today. And we have another dynamic duo for you. So a little intro. Carin leads the Harvard Business School's research and case writing group, so HBR, and has helped them write more than 200 case studies on organizations and managers around the world. And at night, she thinks about how to make their challenging lives better. So we'll kind of dive into what those, nightly insights might be. And then Antonio, he consults at Buffed, where he focuses on leadership upskilling and helping fintech scale-ups humanize organizational development. Outside academia, his interests are in bootstrap innovation management and creative communication. And a little side note on the creative communication piece is that he's actually the co-author of Capt and Bossman's Workplace Stories, which is the world's first microlearning picture book for professionals. So definitely go and check that out if you like picture books. So very, very excited to have both of you guys on the show. I would like to start off, maybe you both can tell me, other than what I read in your bio, what is your background in terms of where you both come from, but most importantly, how did that come together? Like, how did those two converge so you guys are working together?
Yeah, well, maybe I can start this one. And thank you for the warm introduction, Vivienne. So basically, I'm a researcher, or have been a researcher for organizational behavior for quite some time. I have finished my PhD on organizational development and the role of storytelling in helping people lead change through attachment forming mechanisms. And basically, that was kind of the general idea that led me to the Academy of Management back in Seattle in 2022. And there I approached Carin through a LinkedIn pitch of this Capt and Bossman book. It's actually the one I have here.
Nice.
Like a hard print. And there's all these different stories and the usage of storytelling to create all of these meaningful micro learnings, or like nuggets that people can consume in a more interesting and entertaining way. And I saw Carin as the person who said that she's really interested in our unorthodox ideas and new approaches to managerial learning. And the rest is history.
Well, so yeah, it's, you've had a show where people met on Clubhouse. We sort of met on LinkedIn, where people do come together, sort of, finding ideas. I think my attraction to the Capt and Bossman stories comes from about 10 years of thinking about, yes,
Wow.
see, so we'll put a link in the chat too.
The burnout episode was a common ground.
Yes, yeah. And just looking for different ideas. So I've been interested in mental health at work for about 10 years. And I started to research it after I lost a friend after a layoff. He died by suicide. And I really wondered why it was that I was spending all my days writing about managers as if they were robots, managing people as if they were robots, which is pretty much what business schools have been doing and continue to do. And I thought, well, maybe there's a better way, and we have to help managers help their people and be in communication. Then, it was very difficult to have these conversations. Then came COVID, and then suddenly we had too many of these conversations. But a lot of the advice is still centered around self-care, time off. And so I'm always looking for ideas and folks who might be coming from the arts or psychology or music or gaming to get some ideas. So that's how we came together and started to collaborate with other people.
Very cool. And I read some of your pieces on Medium, and I love just the unique take you have on the intersection, I think, of art and science and psychology. Super interesting. One of the pieces that you wrote together that I read talks about workplace stress. And so this is something, we hear a lot about. And I'm just curious, what inspired this piece? Kind of what made you want to talk about it?
So in some ways, I think, Vivienne, what we're trying to encourage managers to do and to encourage companies to support managers is for them to become a little bit a composite of you, which is, you're coming from the science, you're highly competitive from what we've read, but you're also interested in art therapy. And so you inhabit both sides, which is very difficult because we've been rewarding managers for just high performance. Suddenly, we've been asking them to also be as high performant on the well-being side.
Right.
And to help employees in the workplace. So they're not really equipped for it. It's quite challenging. And just stress has been all around for, ever since, even before COVID, of course, but it has been exacerbated. And one of the main sources of stress at work We think of long hours, we think pay is important, but it's also tasks that are not properly designed for the person engaging in those tasks. And that's a fundamental managerial job. But in order for me to figure out whether you can do those tasks, I need to figure out the amount of stress and strain you can be under to do those tasks. So we were interested in trying to find a place, different interventions that managers can give at different places.
Hmm. And I'm just curious on that. Were you interested in looking at the stress on employees and how that's different from the stress that managers face, for example? Was that something that you guys have looked at before?
I think it's actually all related, and stress really can, sort of present as contagious. And the more under stress I am put by my hierarchy as a manager, the more I'm likely to put it on my employees. But I think employees are also responsible here. Everybody wants a collegial, supportive workplace, but we want everybody else to do it. We want to be able to behave the way that we want. It's easy to criticize managers. It's difficult, often people are not supporting their managers. So I think in order for this challenge to be tackled, it really has to come from any size, including employees themselves who, bring all their stresses from home, from their cell phones, from geopolitical affairs to the workplace also.
Right.
Antonio, what do you think?
Yeah, I just wanted to, put a little bit of an emphasis on the humanizing part, because while we do advocate for the humanization and for the workplace to take you in as a human being, as yourself, we're also aware that introducing a human element into the workplace dramatically increases the complexity that people have to endure. So there's a little bit of a balance thing here going on. While it's cool for managers to look at you as a human being, you also have to look at them as a human beings. As human beings who have their faults, have their stresses. All the stressors that Carin mentioned play an important role in terms of how close are we towards the when we take a look at the stress curves, and how strained are we as individuals. Which metal are we from the medium piece? The thing is, these different elements play a different role depending on how well you are feeling. And certain, normal everyday stuff might just overwhelm you if you've already been strained by something outside of the workplace. So there's a lot of things to consider here, a lot of stuff behind the idea of humanization, and the general idea of we should all behave as humans, as we want to, as we feel we need to. And it's more about the communication side of it. So help each other understand the other side, and be a better listener. That's actually what Carin was recently writing about.
Yeah, great. That's a great segue actually to my next question about listening. Because Antonio, you're right that the humanization part, I don't know if managers are really being trained on this, and it's a really important part of the job. And one piece of advice that's always been given to managers is, okay, listen more to your employees. You got to practice active listening. And I'm not sure if managers really know what that looks like, or what are some of the challenges with actually listening. Even though we're being told all that all the time, I think there's still a gap, right, between actually doing that.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point, and the take that we had from the whole case study, so to speak, or hearing different people on different hierarchical positions in different industries experience the challenge of understanding what's being told versus interpreting what the other person is saying. So some of the managers were seeking errors, seeking for where do I give feedback, how do we improve the performance after this feedback has been given. And on the other hand, some people, tried to be an empathetic listener and then didn't actually come up with a solution. So there was a lot of therapy type of behavior, which isn't really appropriate for the workplace that's driven by performance and getting things done. And from my personal research, what I've learned is that people in distress often seek out proximity and overall attachment figures. So there's a lot of place and potential for fruitful exchange between a leader of change, but whether it's like a managerial thing or a project or a geopolitical situation. So someone who's going to be helping people embrace this change, and people who have to embrace it. There's a lot of space for meaningful attachments to be formed, and there's a lot of challenges with all the different attachment styles that people form throughout their lives and bring it to the workplace. But yeah, that's also something Carin was writing about. So maybe she'll give a deeper overview.
So I think the relationship is some explicitness. So I think in a lot of the stuff that we're interested in is what are ways that can improve communication between, we can put them as sort of separate entities, but as employees and managers in a time when there is stress, it's difficult to have productive conversations just in general. And with listening, the distinction of what am I listening to and what am I listening for is the one that we found helpful, which is, what is why am I in this conversation with you, Vivienne? Let's say we're at the workplace. What might you be seeking from me? Can I be explicit in asking you? Are you coming to me for coaching? Are you coming to me as your supervisor? Would you like me to intervene? We try to do some of this in our couples. We try to do some of it in our families. Sometimes it's just as awkward as in the workplace, but even just a little bit of stepping back, which is what might my person need from me in this conversation? And the reason we spend some time learning from how doctors do it is that they're actually a profession where there's a very scripted conversation. And part of what they do in their conversation is they distinguish between what the patient may be saying, which is the symptoms, my head hurts, versus the signs, which is I present to my doctor as a nail in the head. And so a doctor is trying to figure out, how to reconcile this, what is actually happening. And so we thought that would be helpful to managers. And then we also talked to coaches and law enforcement officers. And actually a law enforcement officer told us an interesting story, which was that he had individuals come seeking a solution, a restraining order. And he would be really rapid at giving out restraining orders. And he thought he was doing a great job. And he was very unpopular, and he wondered why. And so he asked his mom, who is a social worker, and he says, I'm giving out all these restraining orders, and yet, the people don't like me. And she says, what you people need is for you to listen to them. They're not coming to you just for the restraining order. They need to know that you actually care, that you're taking the time to understand why they have showed up at your courthouse and what may be happening. And he said that once he's changed that behavior, it transformed him and his constituents. The problem in the workplace is that we're all trying to operate at 120%. And so all this stuff takes a lot of time. And it takes a lot of understanding what the other person wants. And
right. And, it just makes me think last week when we had the Mintzbergs on, one thing that Henry talked about was this conundrums, like managers are caught in this conundrum. And I think one of them here is managers, yes, should listen, but also they're not therapists. So they're not just there to listen. They're also there to manage performance. And so where do you draw that line? How do you have that balance between listening and empathizing and being compassionate, but also being like, there are expectations, like there are deadlines, and you have to meet them in some way. And so how do you see that? Do you see that as a problem managers constantly face, especially when you wrote that piece about listening? Is that a conundrum you see managers kind of caught in?
Oh, absolutely. I think this is the real challenge of the time. I mean, it's been, around for years, but I think now there is, employees are demanding more accommodations.
Yeah.
We are acknowledging that our employees are indeed very, very different. We need to be able to provide accommodations. I mean, in the US, it's part of, the ADA, it's part of the law. And we need to catch ourselves as managers also not making assumptions for others, which, might happen, which is like, oh, Vivienne looks stressed, so she cannot be promoted. Or, Carin has 3 children, surely she cannot travel. So part of, I think, the first job of the managers is becoming conscious of the biases that they may be bringing to any intervention with their employee. And our biases, especially in mental health issues, are, they come from our genetics, from our own experience with health issues, but also with those of other people. So, my father was alcoholic, highly functioning. I might be a manager who actually doesn't really intervene if I see that somebody might be struggling with substance use, because I've seen a very functional view of it. Had it been a different one, I would be bringing a very different person. So I think a distinction for managers is, if you are being asked to be more human, just think of you as the human in that conversation first. And the more explicit you are about the biases that you may be bringing, the better you are able to communicate with the other person. And you're right. At the end of the day, there are jobs that have requirements. And if those need to be met, there are HR departments. If your company is big enough, there are EAPs, there are resources that you can point your employee to. stepping into the role of the manager is inappropriate, of the therapist is inappropriate, because most managers are not therapists.
Exactly, right. Yeah. So in this very kind of difficult spot that managers sometimes find themselves, do you find that there is sufficient support for managers in having difficult conversations, or what is available for a manager who needs to grow in this human aspect of management?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Karen was mentioning earlier about the biases and expressing them openly, I think it plays an important role in how expectations are being set in this communication between a manager and the team. Because, as diversity becomes a real thing and diverse intellectuals work in the workplace and contribute with their original ideas coming from these diverse settings, there's definitely going to be differences of opinions. And by setting these clear expectations, which is a super simple thing, it doesn't really need any special type of education or resources to set this thing up. It just changes the way discourse is being done in a team or in an organization. And working towards expressing these biases and being more human in a conversation can actually help mitigate a lot of these difficult conversations that often turn to discord. Which is actually another topic that we were writing about, and in overall different how these different perspectives and how diverse ideas from diverse workforce actually comes together to a meaningful and functional outcome that the manager actually is responsible for, and is something that the manager is working for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that idea. Sorry, go for it.
No. Yeah, I was just going to add that the other thing that we have going for us is conversations like these. So, there have been a lot of conversations around stress at work, a lot, both like with people who are not, but at work also. So I think that's a huge benefit. And, some of your shows have been around stigma. There's still a great deal of stigma. But at least we're talking about it. At least we're admitting. We have managers who have come forward in the pandemic and said, we've had top leaders, saying, this is too much for me. I am recusing myself. I can no longer lead this country. I do not want to be, Minister of Defense anymore. The pressure that we're putting on leader is just too high. And so instead of blaming the individuals who are coming out and saying, I'm recusing myself, we should be thinking of the structures and the kind of hyper performance that we're expecting of leaders. So I think that's good. The other thing that I think is really an advantage for humanity is that sciences are becoming more accessible. So early in the pandemic, Professor Andrew Huberman out of Stanford, a neuro-ophthalmologist, started to talk about the role of hormones, the role of neurotransmitters. Lex Friedman out of MIT has had very interesting guests who have talked about, their sort of reaction to, what is reason, what is humanity, what is science. We know a lot more about neuroscience than we did before. We know a lot more about the gut biome than we did before, and it's all accessible online. And then the organization like yours, who are trying to make it accessible to managers. So I think there's a lot of hope in this conversation. We've had difficult topics, but I think there's really a lot of hope. The science is with us. Psychology is making progress. I think we have to make sure that managers have access to that kind of information.
Right. I totally agree with you, Carin. I think access to and teaching managers how to navigate through all the information. It's almost like information overload, like trying to figure out how to navigate through that, I think is one thing as well.
The characteristic of a great transformation and a great change is actually when an individual can see beyond the fear that is totally natural and, an occurrence that happens every time. It's just a different, the difference is how different people approach this fear, because some are able to turn it into hope and see what lies beyond the fear if it is overcome. And that's actually a super important element of all engaging stories, because every story is about transformation. It's about changing things, hopefully to the better. And usually the overcoming of fear is the most engaging and most interesting element.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to end our new talk with a kind of like a zooming out question, which is, in your opinion, working with these case studies and writing about the needs of managers, what do you think the biggest need of managers today is, or the biggest challenge that is facing managers?
I think they're tired. We're tired. And I think you're also managing a workforce that is always on the move, sort of emotionally on the move. So a lot of the science around, quiet resignation, quiet quitting, conscious quitting, whatever the LinkedIn word of the week might be, all point to people not being where they want to be. And so I think as a manager, and the managers themselves are on the move. So this investing in creating a team that you know is cheating on you emotionally at night by looking at different job options and fantasizing somewhere else. So I think the biggest challenge for managers is to deal with the fact that everybody's having affairs at the moment. And then I would say trying to keep it small, which is there's a lot of talk about purpose at work. The individuals want to be connected to big things, maybe being kind to each other at work, trying to come up with using humor to get things out. We wrote about having stress kits, or I have a thinking cap, which if I don't want to talk in a meeting, I'll put it on. If I need love in a meeting, I'll signal. Finding humor, I think, would be a challenge for managers. And then exploring things that maybe don't feel necessarily comfortable, like something related to the arts. So I think it's a difficult time to be in management, but I do hope that the young generation will also understand what a blessing it is to mentor people, to coach them, and to see them coming along. Because I get very worried when you see that young people don't want to manage, and I know for me it's the highlight of every day. My team really is. Antonio,
Yeah,
what
I
would
mean,
you say?
if I'm to build up on what Karen was talking about in terms of being tired, I think a huge problem is the sensation of psychological unsafety for managers as well as teams. It's caused by all of these situational stuff that we've already mentioned, but the general idea is that because of all the turbulence and all of these psychological affairs that team members are having, it puts a tremendous type of a pressure on people, and without the possibility of being able to experiment, to try something new, to fail if necessary. It's the mother of all learning, and we learn the most from failure stories. So when people feel a lack of psychological safety, there's usually a tendency to avoid sharing ideas because I'm going to look stupid if I say something that other people won't be open towards. I think it's connected with this tendency to try out boring stuff, something that's already been done. So in a way, we close up our imagination, we close up the space for creativity, and then we're going to be faced with the challenge of, okay, so now we need organic growth. So what are we going to do if we don't have some creative ideas and some general ideas on how we innovate or how we optimize stuff that we're doing? We're going to be reduced to cost cutting, and when we cut costs, headcount is a pretty big step on the P&L for people to analyze and come up with different approaches. So in a way, I think it's all connected towards this whole notion of being tired, being bored about stuff, and just generally feeling a lack of safety.
Yeah, I think the term psychological safety, it's come up a lot in our research as well. I know it's really gaining traction in terms of something that is so important in maintaining workplace health and well-being. We have one question from the chat that I'll just throw out there before we close. But do you believe there is a big generational difference in terms of leadership styles? I guess, how have you seen leadership styles change over the years?
So I think the archetypes of leaders have probably remained the same. So, but the way that they present is different. So I think the millennials and especially the Gen Zs will be different types of managers in the mental health area because they have been more exposed to talking about it as young individuals. Whether it will make them much better leaders, that remains to be seen because they might actually fall into the traps of making assumptions or being too quick to sort of come to conclusions. But yes, I think we're back. I've been in the workplace and writing about managers long enough that, charismatic leadership was good. Charismatic leadership is bad. Charismatic leadership is good. Charismatic leadership is bad. Centralization is good. Decentralization is the way to go. So there's always a little bit of a pendulum. And I think now in COVID, managers have had to sort of go a little bit further towards, I really want to give everybody what they need. But now you're seeing managers saying, I'll give you what you need, but you have to give me what I need, which is performance. And so this pulling back to the office, this pulling back to, productivity And I think this tug of war is going to go on for a little while. I think the new leaders are more willing to consider humanness and to present as such with its strong pros and its dangerous cons if it's not done properly.
Yeah, and I think I've been seeing a lot of an increase in like this buddy style leadership, where people want to be best friends in the workplace instead of addressing underperformance and stuff like that, which actually comes from a certain behavior that's seen on social media, which is a tendency to be liked, to gain some attention, and be visible, be constantly interacted with and adored to a certain degree. I think modern leaders are more fixated on the creation of personal brands, which sometimes turns into a narcissistic trait to a certain degree, of course. And I think that's interesting in a way that, the impression of me is more important than what I'm actually doing. So I'm going to try and do my best to manage this impression instead of managing performance, which I think is a challenge. That's going to be, like Carin mentioned, that's going to be interesting to observe, in the upcoming years.
So, and I know you both want to post on that, actually, if you want to put that in the chat so people can read, that'd be great.
Sure, yeah. And I think related is also, the wonder, at least my wonder, that a generation that, breaks up or ghosts each other instead of breaking up, I do wonder how difficult conversations will occur at work. And if we're back at the beginning of our conversation, which is what do humans really seek? They want to be heard. They want to be listened to. And expediency can be very challenging in these situations. And if you have new leaders that are less used to having difficult conversations and more used to sort of planning for their next move by cultivating their brand, there's a lot to be done there also. I see another question around psychological safety. So Amy Edmondson at HBS is the leader in this space. She's written a lot on LinkedIn. A great place to be. I think most things do start from the top, but then the top has to be willing to accept what the bottom is doing. But I think without the top on this issue, it's difficult. And one issue with psychological safety, often it gets presented as a non-conflictual workplace. So back to Antonio's point, it is not because we don't have conflict that we are a good culture. And so I think she really pushes people to think about what are the tools you need in order to engage in a safe way, but to engage, because if we're all working in parallel, the friction of the workplace and common creation really fades.
Right. And a really good book I read by her is The Fearless Organization, where she kind of like lays it all out. Really, really great book on psychological safety.
Yes. And she's really published a lot on LinkedIn also during the pandemic to help us all. So do check her out. So
awesome. Well, thank you both for all of your wisdom and insight. There's so much to glean from this conversation, and I know we could go on, but I will bring this talk to a close. And thank you for your time and all the writing that you're putting out on Medium and LinkedIn. For those of you who are watching, you can definitely go check all their writing out, and stay in touch with what both of you guys are doing with HBR and management as a whole. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having us. Yes, and please reach out with ideas and feedback also on everything. And thank you to Team Nurau for everything that you guys are doing to try to help exactly the managerial population that we've been talking about. So we'll see you guys soon. All right. Bye, guys. Ciao, ciao.
Cheers.